So hello everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Idris. I'm the founder of RELEVATION, the investment summit in the built world, and this webinar is organized by PropTech Hong Kong. So thanks a lot for this opportunity, Vivian. And we're here to discuss one of the topics that passionates me the most. No, it's not travel, it's not food, it's not music, but it's the built world and the innovation trends in the construction and real estate value chain. And more precisely, we will deep dive on the innovation strategies of large real estate corporates, but also discuss the European PropTech ecosystem, which is a very rich one with 3.2 thousand startups. And you know, when large construction and real estate corporates asked us, but why should innovation be a priority? We often answer them that it's because they don't want to be the T-Rex. The T-Rex was the top of the food chain, but was not able to adapt in a fast-changing environment, and so it basically disappeared. So the T-Rex didn't have any agility strategy or innovation strategy, and so we think that today a number of construction and real estate players are in the same position as the T-Rex. They need to adapt in a fast-changing environment. And so to deep dive in this topic, I'm super happy to have Paolo Riguto from Reach UK, Conan Lauterpacht from Sustainable Future Ventures, and Kingma Ma from PropTech One. Let me maybe first ask to each of you if you can start by introducing yourself, starting with you, Paolo.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Idris, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Very grateful. So I'm Paolo. I'm a partner at Reach UK. We are part of Second Century Ventures, one of the most active PropTech funds globally. And in turn, we are the venture arm of the National Association of Realtors in the US, which is the world's biggest trade body. So we're we like to say member first, a real estate practitioner focused strategic vehicle. We have, so we sit in the UK, but we have similar programs in the US, Australia, Canada, and they're rolling out. And what we really focus on is investing in companies typically seed to Series A, but we have gone bigger and helping them grow in our local markets. And then Second Century Ventures effectively acts as a follow-on vehicle, ideally until IPO. So they're an evergreen fund, so they never close. And so the idea is really for longevity. So how do we best serve the real estate market through technology that will last through the ages and make a significant impact? That's our sort of core focus. And just one more thing I would say is we are somewhat weaker on Comtech, is less of a focus. We tend to be more focused on post-construction.
Yeah, okay, clear. Thanks. Conan, over to you.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Conan Lauterpacht. I am a founding partner at Sustainable Future Ventures. Sustainable Future Ventures is an early stage venture capital fund that we've launched in conjunction with PATRIZIA, that is one of Europe's largest real asset managers. We invest in technology companies in the built environment, and we have a specific focus on solutions that drive sustainability either through environmental or social means. And about at least half of the fund and half of the investments we make go into companies that drive sustainability through their business model, and the rest is general productivity and efficiency. What we aim to do is to bring together really three key skill sets in the fund. That is real estate experience and expertise that can be value additive to companies in the space, technology operations experience, which both I and the other members of the team have, and ultimately traditional technology investment experience in order to be value additive to our portfolio companies. And prior to doing this, I was an early stage technology operator in the PropTech space, and then worked for Altus Group as a technology incumbent, I guess, in the space, and so have worked with a number of the largest real estate investors globally, and so have some views on different innovation strategies, which I'd be happy to share.
Excellent, thank you. Conan, sorry, Kingma, what about you?
Cool. Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Kingma, and I work for PropTech One. And PropTech One is a early stage, also mostly focusing on seed and Series A, European PropTech VC firm with offices in Berlin and London. So Berlin is where our headquarters is based, and most of my team is based as well. It's where we started out in 2018. Since then, we've been investing from our first fund, which we closed at the end of last year. And to date, we've made 14 investments. We focus on three key themes. The first one being digitalization in order to drive efficiency in the real estate and construction markets. The second one for customization, to help real estate asset managers and owners adapt their real assets to changing demographics or changing needs. And the third part is on the climate tech, so innovations that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions pre-construction, during construction, and post-construction as well. I joined the team at the start of last year as the head of UK, so I've set up our UK office, and we've made a few UK investments so far. And I'm also part of the investment team at PropTech 1 too. Our LP base comes from quite a mix of different international real estate companies doing construction, doing property management. Some are just asset owners, some are family offices with real estate assets. So quite a different mix of different businesses and different specialties within different geographies and different sizes as well. So we're very proud of that mix, and we're very excited to continue investing in the kind of early stage field of European PropTech.
Thank you. So a diverse panel of speakers from different backgrounds, different geographies. So good to have you all. Maybe let's start to set the tone with a provocative question, but should innovation really be a survival criteria for construction and real estate professionals today? Should it be really a priority? Starting off with you, Conan, what's your take here? And maybe also explain why, because just explaining yes, of course, is not enough.
Okay, so first of all, I think I'm going to draw a distinction between innovation and digitization. And I say this from the perspective of someone that has been in the space for 9 or 10 years now, looking at real estate technology. And that distinction is this, that to me, digitization is the implementation of technology to digitize or evolve existing processes, versus innovation, which is really taking that digitization process a step further and thinking about how can innovation and technology fundamentally change your business model or the way you do business. And for me, the digitization piece of that, which is still a huge challenge for many participants in the industry, it's not even a question. I mean, you know what the industry needs to do, and what many companies in the industry need to do, is move to a state where they are at a level where other industries and other verticals have been for the last 5 or 10 years. And so that you sometimes risk getting this disconnect when everyone's focused talking about innovation and all the latest exciting cutting edge technology or blockchain and the latest shiny phrase, that overlooks the fact that for the majority of participants in the real estate construction space, actually their first and primary challenge is simply digitization. It's implementing the right technology tools to make their existing business processes a little bit more efficient, and moving away from a situation where, you know, prior to COVID, all they had, you know, they'd use email and that was it. And post-COVID, they now use Teams or Zoom and email, but there is, you know, still huge opportunity. So I would make that first distinction. And then if we think about, is innovation necessary, then I would say absolutely, you know, because now we live in an environment where it's not just about sticking with the status quo as things stand. And I think for me, and the reason the fund is named as it is that the sustainability agenda is going to force technology adoption and change in the industry in a way that we've simply not seen before. And technology and innovation is a large piece of the way that companies are going to enable their evolution from current position to being green, CO2 minimizing industry participants. And if they fail to do that, they will lose market position. And the companies that deploy technology and innovation in the most efficient manners will be able to access a lower cost of capital, access higher grade tenants, and ultimately be more profitable businesses.
Yeah, potentially even access or acquire and retain talent, because if they don't innovate, they might not able. Any comments here, Paolo? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in, because one, I fully agree on the point of digitization versus innovation. I would say definitely sustainability, it's going to be innovation. I think some of the players that we deal with are still very much focused on digitization, and I think that is fair enough. I think, you know, crawl, walk, run style. I think you have no choice but to innovate in sustainability. And I think Conan's point around business model is actually the key one that I would focus on. Is business model innovation is going to have to come to the forefront because of digitization, right? So we have a value chain of different players with different incentives that are currently, I think the business model is definitely going to have to change. And I think for real estate asset owners in particular, that's going to be quite a seismic shift compared to what's been happening for the last however long. So I think innovation is critical, but I'm biased. But I think more so than that, I think the applied use of innovation. So I do have a slight concern when it comes to, I've hired a head of innovation who knows the whole tech landscape and knows everybody, but then it has never actually made use of that whatsoever. And it's more, virtue signaling than anything else.
Yeah, it's to put in the report, we are busy with innovation. Okay,
yeah.
Kingma, your take.
Yeah, so I think, Idris, you asked the question about survival criteria today. And so kind of what's happening in the world today is a huge amount of inflation. And we know for sure that the inflation is partially driven by rising construction costs. So increases in costs of particularly timber, increase in costs of logistics and transport of this material to sites, shortage of skilled labor as well. That's definitely making a material impact in terms of actual cost versus expectations of development projections, and so that's going to put a lot of pressure into any companies that are investing or developing real assets. So I think for those companies, definitely there's a greater urge for finding innovative solutions to essentially combating costs and making sure they don't get into a negative cash position. So innovation is a broad term. It means applying new practices as much as applying new tools as well. And I think what a lot of PropTech tools allow is essentially forcing customers who adopt them to kind of embrace a leaner and potentially a much more efficient way of working too. So I'm not saying that PropTech is the solution to inflation at all, but I am saying that inflation for sure is creating a lot of pressure on companies today, particularly companies on the construction world. And so I think that will bring towards more attention on tools and practices that will drive efficiency.
Yeah. And the topic of the construction costs or the construction material cost in Europe and especially in Belgium is a huge topic today. A lot of large construction sites are currently on hold because of the costs that are not stable. And so big topic. Now PropTech Lab has created an interesting model to assess the innovation maturity of large construction and real estate corporations. And so they use 5 different metrics to assess where you are. Are you aware of innovation, or are you pioneering innovation, like leading innovation? So they've established 5 different stages using 5 different metrics. The first one is, do you have FTEs working full-time on innovation, dedicated to innovation? Do you have a budget allocated to innovation in terms of your annual turnover? Is it 1% or more than 1%? Third criteria is, do you have a clear innovation focus? So you want to focus on customer experience, sustainability, or any other stuff. Do you have a clear innovation strategy? So you know how you are going to deliver on your innovation focus. And finally, is innovation part of the executive committee agenda as always like a talking point? So my question to you, dear panelists, is what do you think about such a model? Do you think it is, what are your comments on this? And also, have you identified any trends in Europe that are relevant, any type of maybe core businesses in the real estate value chain that are more or less mature in Europe? Because a big problem is the siloed value chain, where you have the architect, the engineer, general contractor, the developer, the property manager, the broker, the whole value chain, and the investor at the end of the day. So are there any patterns or any trends, like engineers are not innovating, developers are super innovating? How do you look at this? Maybe starting off with you, Paulo, to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. So let me take one at a time. It's a lot to digest there. So I think the factors make sense. The one I'd be missing is, the past is the best predictor of the future behavior. And when it comes to innovation, I think there's a clear split between exploration and exploitation. And I think a lot of the factors are more exploration focused, right? So you're going out, you're finding new sort of levels of, you're finding who are the innovators, and also being clear on, when we talk about, or at least for us, when we talk about innovation in real estate in the guise of startups, it's how do they find the best solutions? It's not necessarily building them in-house or doing any of that kind of stuff. So really, you do need exploration, but if you don't have exploitation, nothing will happen, right? It's binary. Unless you actually work with an innovative company to provide a service, you're never going to get there. One of the things that I find missing in Europe on those factors is, it's a really interesting case study. I'd highly recommend anyone interested in PropTech should check out UDR Incorporated. It's a US REIT, does apartments. Look at their investor presentation. They literally break out all the technologies, the impact on NOI, how much money they're planning on getting from this, everything from smart homes to self-service to data analytics. And they literally put a number behind it saying, we expect to drive, 50 million of shareholder value. I don't think we are necessarily, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's quite specific, but I'd love to see more large scale developers putting some targets in place that they could stand behind and say, look, in the next 3 years, this is what we expect to do with technology. Also because it's very opaque, right? So we talk to a lot of large scale developers. It's very hard when you're outside to understand, well, what do they really want? If I'm a startup, trying to get my foot in the door is hard enough, then to try and service these guys is even harder. So I think your factors deal very well with the initial part of the value chain. Everything that comes after, when it comes to really operationally implementing some of these technologies, I think would be helpful, right? But I think that is part of why it's such a nascent industry. What was your last point around trends? What I would say in general, we split the market. So we are less focused on the construction side. So we typically focus on those tools for agents. So, the buying and selling of homes and such. And then everything else is pretty much what we call commercial. So where you're a large scale asset owner. So everything from office commercial to build to rent, multifamily. Those that are closer to the end user tend to be more interested in technology is generally where we're at. So BTR, well, one, they also make a lot more money. So BTR and student housing, let's be very clear, are flush with cash, and they are very closely aligned with the end user, right? More so than offices with tenant engagement, because you have FMs and asset managers in between. And so we see where the value chain skips a couple of steps and gets you closer to the end user, where there's more likely to be a brand that has some sort of brand value. And that's where we start seeing the lines blurring on real estate. They are far more tech forward. Is one thing. And then the final thing that I would say, the other trend is that point around, the business model. We were talking to a large association for FMs, and there it's all about how do they now rebrand FMs into building managers, because otherwise you think of the guy who fixes the toilet. Well, that's not really required anymore once you have predictive maintenance. And the way they got paid was all about call outs. That's also no longer required. And so you're now seeing this sort of shift of who is actually performing which duties and who is responsible for tenant engagement, workplace happiness, air quality, and such. That's what we're seeing here, but it's still early days and no one really knows where it's going to end up. Well, at least I don't know where it's going to end up. Conan and Kingma might.
Over to you, Conan.
I think I would add maybe one element to the assessment of innovation maturity. And that is connecting the innovation role. And I'm going to use innovation really in this context. I mean, digitization and innovation, but really in my mind, they are best separated. Like, you have a body, if the organization has any scale at all, you have a team that's focused on how you digitize that business. And then you have a team that's perhaps, or an individual that's looking at, what are appropriate solutions and what are interesting solutions in the market. And then once they identify them, they can look at how you exploit them, to Paolo's point. But a key factor is what is the connectivity? What is the structure that connects innovation with the core business operations? Because I think a lot of companies run a risk when they spin up an innovation function, that you have an innovation function that go and do interesting innovation things and find cool technologies, but that there's this disconnect between the core business and the core pain points in that business. And so there's a journey of evolution from an innovation function where they go from just looking at really interesting, the things that excite them the most, to then being pulled back to refocusing on what are the core pain points within this business. And I think one test that where they are is to see how an innovation function interacts with the core business and how they test and assess and prioritize the technologies which they're looking for that core business.
Yeah, clear. Everything related to change management and the people, adopting new solutions as well. Kingma, do you want to add anything?
I can add something about the model itself, but I think Conan and Paolo have already said everything about the other parts of the question about business maturities in different asset classes.
Okay.
Yeah, just about the model itself, I think it's a really interesting 5-part framework. I think it'll be really interesting to ask the question of who that framework is being asked to. Is it the CEO, for example, of the real estate company, or is it people on the ground? So some are quite quantitative questions, like how many full-time employees are dedicated towards innovation. That's very easy to measure. But then the other questions, like, does your company have a clear innovation strategy? I think you might get very different answers depending on the person's position in the company, depending on their responsibility and role as well. So I guess having a better innovation strategy, or a very generalized statement, is something that the whole company is aligned by. So sending out that survey to different audiences would be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there is also a challenge in the budget question, because often they have especially developers and REITs investors, they have a budget at the company level and they have a budget at project level, of course, and so it's hard for them to have a view on do they have a budget allocated to innovation, because they say no, we don't have, but we have almost unlimited budgets. We decide where we invest it, but it's not a bucket dedicated to innovation. But anyway, going further, we have seen different innovation strategies that were implemented by large construction and real estate corporations. Sometimes it's a combination of the different following strategies. But usually they pick one of them, either create an incubation department, so where they will try to test new solutions outside of their core business to keep captive their users, or it is acceleration, so source startups from abroad and then accelerate them internally, and at the end of the acceleration funnel decide if they invest or if it becomes just preferential commercial partner. We have companies doing more R&D, so assembling different disciplines, urbanists, philosophers, biologists, etc., to think of the city of tomorrow and then create a vision of innovation to be relevant in the city of tomorrow. We have the innovation hub or co-creation, so try to co-create solutions on specific projects with startups and then try to generalize the approach on the rest of the portfolio. And finally, we have the investment. Invest direct in startups or invest as an LP in a fund. And so my question for you is, do you consider, I mean, what is, according to you, the best innovation strategy, and what are the pros and the cons of investing as an LP in a VC fund? Because to me, it can be an essential tool to have access to information, market intelligence, etc. But curious to hear your thoughts.
I'm happy to go first.
And I will let you first, Paolo. But maybe additional question, if I may. Why is it bucking as well? Because we have seen many corporates listening to VC raising capital and then deciding not to invest. So why is it bucking? Is it because they don't want to invest their balance sheet outside of their core business, or? So it's a bit of a long question, but for you, Paolo.
No, so the reason I just want to go first is because I think there's one thing that for me is missing, and I say it as being in an accelerator. If I was a real estate company, all I would care about is a framework for testing new technologies quickly in a building where I feel the risks to failure are quite low, right? So my concern is sometimes if I was a real estate person and I heard about incubation, accelerators, co-creation, innovation labs, I would just be like, oh my God, I like bricks and mortar and yield, right? And I think that there's a risk that we scare off the real estate industry by making something very big out of it, when actually a lot of what we deal with isn't. I don't need the real estate companies to want to in-house any of this stuff. I just want them to be open to being users of the best technologies out there, right? And some of it, particularly again, if we're talking about commercial, it's look, just give us one building, give us a pilot. Like most of the time, the risk of running a loss is actually quite low. Startups are quite willing to structure around it. We're not By the way, this is different with construction, right? With construction, this is where you get the issue of material sciences, where, yeah, you don't want to be the first one to produce a building that collapses in 10 years.
Yeah.
But from where we sit, particularly from a software perspective, I mean, there's a massive bucket that just says a simple, very quick framework for testing out a technology on a limited amount of space with clear KPIs and clear goals. And this isn't easy if you're not a tech person, right? And if you're in a political organization. So I would say that that's the big one that for me is just missing when we talk about transfer. I'll leave the rest of it. I'm going to be pretty negative on the LP point around corporate. So maybe someone else wants to take it away and be more positive than I'll be.
Conan or Kim,
Yeah,
you both?
I'm happy to take a shot. So yeah, I mean, obviously, the answer is what it depends on what the real estate LP is most after. I think there's very good reasons to invest both directly and also indirectly to PropTech startups, and indirectly means basically going through a VC. I think the core reason for basically going indirectly is because that VCs see a lot of startups ultimately. So and we spend a lot of time not only looking, but also categorizing what these startups do, how they're positioned against each other. So if there's an LP interested in a particular business model or particular technology that they believe can make an impact, then we bring a lot of information in terms of the companies that we've seen and the comparative in terms of whether that company, whether the companies we've seen are better or worse for whatever reasons than whatever the LP might be proposing. I think that's kind of reason number one. I mean, I think as generally the LP interactions that we have as a fund are with senior figures, so C-level figures, or the head of innovation for whatever LP as well. So they are people with quite a lot of good mandate. And I think their interest is to learn as quickly and as efficiently as possible about what's kind of going on in the market. And I think there's three kind of core ways to learn. The first one is by testing out different startups themselves, and that might be through an accelerator, that might be through applying a tool and kind of going through their internal procurement process. I think that's number two is in terms of speaking to other people in the real estate market, so they're kind of peers. And real estate is quite a collaborative industry at a macro level because it's obviously such a huge industry as well. So people are very used to kind of sharing knowledge and sharing ideas with each other. And so it's really important, I think, for any kind of VC focus in PropTech to kind of bring together that kind of community as well. So be it through events or be it through newsletters or be it through other media as well, where essentially it's very accessible for one real estate innovation leader to talk to another. And finally, as I mentioned, kind of on the kind of research side for the innovation side, I think just to kind of really talk about the accelerator side and kind of why that might be an appropriate strategy. Again, it depends, because I think a lot of the best startups don't go through accelerators, to put it very candidly. And I'll use one example. So because PropTech is quite a broad area, there's so many different business models out there. There's so many overlapping industries that real estate touches on as well. One of the companies that we invested in kind of towards the start of this year is a company called FloodFlash, and they're an insurtech business. And so what they do is provide parametric insurance for buildings, for tenants, owners of buildings, which are at risk of flood. And so being a flood insurance provider, they could have easily gone through accelerators from many of the large insurance companies in order to kind of develop out their proposition. However, they chose not to because they knew that their proposition, what they had, was very unique to the market. The technology was extremely defensible. And so rather than kind of focus on just working towards the kind of deployment and kind of progression of one insurance company, they wanted to work with several, which is why they're backed by many actual insurance companies, including, for example, Munich Re, which has a very large accelerator arm themselves. And kind of, I think through kind of being able to engage with larger parts of the market, they're able to actually carve their own path and also get access to investors outside of the core insurtech field like ourselves, and with generalist investors like Local Globe and Pentech as well, for example. And so that's yeah, it all depends on kind of, I guess, the ambition of the founders who are kind of carving out their solutions. But I've seen quite often that's kind of starters that kind of go through a corporate backed accelerator often become just a corporate procurement tool, and so that brings quite different exit opportunities, I think, to those founders.
Yeah, I see.
I guess just to add a couple of words, I mean, to pull it back to the beginning, which was like how do different innovations, what are the benefits of different innovation strategies? And you know, for me, it always starts like you've got to start with the organization assessing the technology capabilities within it and making sure that they have someone in the organization that is capable to assess what are the appropriate technologies for that business. And then everything needs to get built upon that bedrock. Otherwise, you basically have people going out and finding shiny toys. I think when we think about the investment approaches, accelerator versus direct versus indirect, I mean, one of the challenges with PropTech more generally is that it's an industry, the real estate industry, in where the participants are generally used to making investments in things. And so as such, they have a natural desire to make direct investments. And sometimes with a real estate mindset, which can be, I'm going to make a direct investment in that business, and I want as much of that asset as I can possibly get, because that is normally how I make money in real estate, which is identify a good asset, get as much of it as possible, and pay as little for it as possible on the way in. Now, that generates a whole load of challenges as for companies developing, whether they are in a single corporate accelerator or whether they have one shareholder that has too large a position. To Kingmar's point, you end up getting pulled. You no longer become a multi-product, multi-customer company. You become almost a single customer company. You need to have a very strong founding team and management team to avoid that type of pull and that type of distraction. So then when we think about indirect funds, investment or accelerators, my view is generally like it's in most cases preferable to being the direct investor, because you ensure that the companies that you're investing in have exposure to a broader customer set. And that's ultimately what you want. And that's the benefit of industry-focused funds or industry-focused accelerators, which is really for the company, it's not so much about how do I run an early stage business, because I think if they're in that type of accelerator, maybe too early for most of the big corporates to engage with, but it actually becomes what's the value of this accelerator or this investment from me? It's like, I want exposure to the industry and I want exposure to as many potential customers in the industry as possible.
Yeah, crystal clear. Thanks to the three of you for this insightful piece of thoughts. Now I would like to ask maybe more concrete examples, tangible examples. Do you have any example of innovation strategies that really helps a specific company to lead innovation to their competitors, like to acquire more market shares, to create a blue ocean or anything like this? Do you have any examples that you could mention? Maybe you can, or Paolo? Yeah, go ahead.
I can give you one, but just because it's a small one that really is so no one will probably have heard of them. So I can't. It will take me a while to think of a big player. So. But I'll give you a good example. Impact Capital Group, sort of integrated value chain, real estate developer, operator, focus on sustainability, everything from modular housing through to pre-registered care, through to BTR, extremely tech focused, has been set up a couple of years ago. So a very new player. I think GDV is in excess of $1 billion, run by sort of ex real estate industry people from Quintain in the UK, which is a big company. But they sort of went that approach, like, so this might be unfair because they had clean slate, right? So they came in and they basically said, like, look, tech is at the forefront of what we do at every part of, and that's why they bought a factory to do timber frame modular housing, and then they brought in tech and the whole, like, so it's unfair, but that's the best example I can think of is that they, and again, I think I love the way Conan had it with digitization versus innovation. These guys for me are innovative because they skipped the whole digitization point, which I think for a lot of big corporates you just need to do. So I think Impact Capital Group is my best example that I can think of where it is a super integrated innovation strategy at the heart of it.
But it's really, I mean, sometimes I have the feeling that large corporates should just stop doing their business and start from zero. And the real innovation will maybe start only through the underdog that starts from zero, a new business, because it's so hard to bring from this level of innovation maturity a company to this level. Maybe it's better to just start from zero, and you don't have this legacy behind, But Conan, you wanted to add anything?
I mean, yeah, I think the point's been drawn out. I was going to differentiate between two types of player, which is your new entrant to the market and your established organization. And there is no doubt that, and I'm not going to name names, but if I think of organizations, the new entrants to the market, let's say people have been in the market 10 or so years, have huge advantage from a digitization standpoint, because ultimately, if you're entering the market in the last 10 years, your starting point has to be, how do I do this as efficiently as possible? And technology becomes an easy differentiator for you versus your more established peers. And so you see rapid technology adoption from new entrants to the market because it's just a differentiator and it's a bit of a no-brainer. And they don't have the legacy challenges that an established operator has. And so for them, the digitization sort of solves itself. And I'd actually say that innovation then almost becomes less of a priority for them because it's just incremental. It's like, we're using technology. What's the next piece of development of technology that we might apply to our current technology stack? Whereas if you look at in a large established operator that has been in existence for 10, like 20, 30, 40, 100 years, whatever the number is, there they have large organizations, legacy technology. And for them, they've been using technology in a certain way. And then the innovation piece comes, we need to try and jumpstart and catch up with the new entrants that we're seeing coming into the market with the demands from our capital allocators. And so for them, then I think the strategy choice and the two different approaches you have is we go very big into innovation. So like they will already have large technology teams, but then the challenge then becomes, how can we migrate this on? And that's why you build a big internal innovation team to help support it. Or you go very light and you basically take someone from the technology team, give them a second hat, a second role, which is you also have an innovation role, and they do it on the side as their second role to source out. And what I think we generally see is that where the organizations are large, that light touch approach to innovation has a time limit on it. And increasingly, you're seeing the biggest organizations expanding the innovation function in some way, shape, or form, because they identify the fact that, a single person with their hat on isn't enough. And if you just have that approach, what it actually encourages is no strategy, because you have different business units within the organization going out and doing their own thing. So that at a certain scale, you need to centralize it and manage that sourcing and then exploitation of new technology. In truth, for the middle part, which is the bulk of the industry by participant numbers, which are neither the largest operators nor the new entrants to the market, what is the right innovation strategy is something which I think is yet to be determined. But I think I would certainly, for them, both because of cost and because of the evolutionary nature of it, you lean on the light side. You make sure that your technology and your digitization team is established and you have the right people in the organization, and then you incrementally build on the innovation side.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for this. 2 weeks ago, there was the ULI Europe event in Brussels, and I remember a very interesting panel where the founder of, the CEO Western Europe of Allianz was saying, and he was on purpose being provocative, because it was the role play of the debate. But he was saying the problem with PropTech is that first, often founders don't know the real estate construction value chain. They don't have an industry background. Second, it's the PropTech ecosystem. So 10,000 startups globally, 3.2 in Europe, is often composed by very small solutions. And we, as a larger corporate, we cannot rely on 10 different small solutions to track data or to manage access control or energy efficiency or parking mutualization or whatever. We need to have a one-stop shop solution. And so for these reasons, he was saying, according to him, but also, again, disclaimer, he was being provocative on purpose, but that PropTech has failed to help the real estate sector so far. What's your opinion on this? Starting off with you, Paulo.
Yeah, so I think on the first point around there's a lot of solutions. I think we see a lot of that. I just want to sort of make the anecdote that I usually say is we're all sitting in buildings, right? We all experience buildings for 95% of our day, pretty much, right? In the same way, that we all go to restaurants and we stay at hotels. And I think the unfortunate part of PropTech is that it's very easy to sit in a building and go, you know what? Oh, it was really hard to buy my house. I could set up a tech platform to do that. Or there are all these forms. Like as consumers, we interface with real estate so much that I think the ideation is pretty easy, and there's a belief that execution is easy, right? And so yeah, I see a lot of startups who are like, I'm a 25-year-old banker and I bought a house and it was a really difficult process, so I thought, let me set up a platform for it, and boom, there you have a new startup in the area. By the way, I'm an ex-banker, so I'm allowed to talk, not throw shade at them. But the point is that we do have a saturation of a lot of startups trying to provide us a lot of solutions, and a lot of people who don't have industry background, who do think that the holy grail is going to be some sort of end-to-end solution, and they have no idea about how complex a single building is because they never see it, right? So I think, and that doesn't help because a lot of the people that we speak to in industry are absolutely inundated by PropTech startups sending them a message saying we have like the best thing since sliced bread. And where I think it's very unfortunate is that because it is a fragmented marketplace, actually, a fragmented marketplace that is typically risk averse and doesn't understand non-asset based investing or non-asset based products, actually a one-stop solution is probably the best you're going to get from, let's call it a market clearing point, right? So i.e. I'm not incentivized to do some sort of BIM model because, like, why would I bother? Because I'm not getting paid for it. My margins are super tight, but someone 5 steps down the value chain could probably benefit from it. Right now, there's no transfer. There's no monetary transfer that takes place between industry participants, not really, right? If you had a one-stop solution, I think that would have worked because you would have been able to sort of say, well, look, actually the FM should subsidize this and the lawyer should subsidize this part because they benefit from having the construction company set up everything properly. I mean, right now that's very difficult. And right now, actually, a lot of the value probably does sit on the development side of the construction side, but they have super tight margins and extremely, like you mentioned, Idris, supply chains are all over the place. They can't afford to do a lot of the stuff that would actually be quite beneficial to everyone further down the line. So no, I don't think we're going to get a one-stop solution. I think people's roles are going to be changing, and they're going to have to figure out what that means from a tech perspective. Some roles might disappear or be upskilled if we're going to be nice about it. But in general, I think we are saturated with a lot of small solutions, that do exactly the same thing with 5% difference with a very hard to judge capability. I don't know. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, clear. I'm just letting 2 seconds to our 2 friends to see if they have any comments. Otherwise, I have another hard question. Okay. I think also one of the massive mental barrier for construction and real estate corporations to start innovating is this mentality: if it's not broken, don't fix it. And so they sometimes struggle with the calculation of the ROI of innovations, and so I would like to ask you, how, according to you, can we measure the success of an innovation? So starting off with you, Conan, do you have any views on this? Or Kingma in the meantime?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, no, go on, Conan.
I guess if it's don't broke, don't fix it. I think it's, it is a challenge traditionally, and as I said, looking at technology adoption in the industry, it has been, if we look over the last 10 years, as we've already touched on, adoption has come from the new entrants who have to do it, and it has come from the largest investors globally, who are often managing multiple asset classes, and so for whom the comparison across their asset classes, fixed income versus equities versus real estate, identifies real problems in the data collection and technology usage in the real estate space. And so then you have the mid-market, which effectively have that attitude broadly, which is, we're making lots of money, technology would be nice, but this is not a priority for us right now. We don't need to. But to the point I made at the beginning, I ultimately believe that the focus on environmental impact of the built environment changes that dynamic, because the need to reduce the environmental impact of operating assets in the built environment requires technology as part of the solution. And if you don't get on board with that, you will be left behind. Ultimately, your assets will be discounted, your operating margins will be thinner, your cost of capital will be higher. So for me, that's what makes it such an exciting time to be a technology investor in the space, is that I've been talking about adoption for almost a decade, and it's been slower than I would have liked to seen it. But now we see a driver that goes straight to the bottom line, and ultimately that's what moves the industry.
Yeah, I do agree. Kima?
Yeah, I think that if we go back to kind of looking at the startups perspective, yeah, founders might come from real estate background, might come from other backgrounds. It doesn't matter really. Like the best founders are the best business people. They are people who are extremely resourceful, extremely quick to responding to opportunities, and extremely resilient as well. And if you look at some of the kind of the PropTech startups that have gained most traction in the last like 10 years, particularly I would say in North America, you know, many of these companies were quite nascent for a long time. I think about Procore as an example. I think it took about a decade for Procore to kind of since it launched, since inception, to actually gain significant traction in the construction and development world. And then it was just positioned in the right place at the right time when finally the construction industry was like, okay, we need to start looking at digital tools in order to, you know, aggregate all the information together in order to manage our mistakes and our risks into one place. And Procore, you know, put a hand up and said, hey, we've got the right solution for it as well. So like the you know, kind of what the industry is looking for changes over time. I think about climate tech kind of today, when lots of real estate companies, especially European ones, are very, very you know, zealous about advocating how it needs to be greatly adopted. But then you know, climate tech has been around for a long time. There's been so much traction, for example, in direct air capture technology, DAC technologies, and yet DAC has been around as a physical machines since the 1980s as well. So it's really about timing the market right. So kind of going back to the Allianz CEO's point as well, you know, it's a two-way conversation, right? So do you have the right solution? Are you building towards the customer's requirements? But also, is the customer currently exactly looking for your solution? I think that's a very dynamic process.
Yeah. So you allow me to do the perfect bridge to the second part of the topic, and we have only 5 minutes left, so I'll be to the point. How is the European ecosystem, PropTech ecosystem like? Have you identified new trends, for instance, new segments of PropTech that are currently emerging, that are currently growing strong? Are there new kids on the block? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Paolo, do you have any comments here?
Oh, that's a tough one, because we're somewhat theme agnostic in the way we work.
Yes.
And I think it's too late now to say like anything climate related, because that's no longer emerging. That's like full front and center, right? I mean, I think that is just, most of PropTech is really going to be around that. And so I think, you know, work that SFE is doing is great, because it just makes it so much easier for all other tech adoption in real estate. Further away, but I think Idris and I've discussed it before. I'm quite interested in cyber tech and at what point that starts coming in. But I do think I'm not even sure I would classify it as emerging. I would say London, particularly because of the fintech, and it has a strong cyber tech base. Cyber tech is the one that I would be looking for in the next couple of years to really come through, given all the investment in IoT sensors and everything else that comes into the buildings. But it is in the middle. No, tenant engagement. I would say tenant engagement, just as a broader sort of theme, is the one that we see a lot of interest in from practitioners, really. Less so from tech side, just more practitioner focused.
Yeah. Kim, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that there's now a lot of digital solutions for PropTech. So, for example, property management systems. I think tenant engagement systems as well. If a real estate asset manager or landlord wants to be interested in those areas, then they can quite quickly find many solutions. So I think the actual area that might be interesting now is is there going to be some kind of consolidation actually in the market, because there's so many tools around that have the same value proposition that ultimately are trying to pitch to the same audience as well. There's definitely still opportunities in certain real estate asset classes. I would say, for example, office is much more ahead than, let's say, I mean, we forget about that, but at the end of the day, like schools or care homes or, you know, other kind of facilities too, which are ultimately buildings as well, when it comes to like properties management, facilities management too. But these are still significant industries, significant areas. So there's still opportunity, I think, for digital tools to kind of penetrate that space. But I think in the kind of, you know, the companies like the JLLs of the world and the British Land of the world, etc., they'll definitely see a very, very wide plethora of essentially similar pitches. Climate tech has been kind of mentioned as well. I think that's where I'm personally very excited about as well. I'm sure Conan's entire team is definitely on it, given the name. But ultimately, you know, a lot of the technology, a lot of the startups that we look at are driven by technological advances. And so the technological advances that enable digitalization are like mobile phones and 4G/5G and cloud computing and processing speed improvements and stuff. And that's still going on, but that's kind of like, it already exists. Things are already fast. You know, we have good coverage everywhere. Mobile phone adoption, particularly in developed economies, is completely saturated. So I think the real innovation actually really comes from more the hardware side. And so that's kind of where I'm particularly interested in myself and the rest of my team as well, and hardware for climate tech and for sustainability too. Yeah. Great.
Conan, we have 30 seconds left, or a bit less. So anything on your side?
I'm actually just going to jump in on what Paolo said. I think cyber and actually the infrastructure that will support the rollout of IoT. You know, when I think about the smart building environment, it can sometimes feel like a bit of a red ocean. There are so many solutions out there, you know, whether it's in HVAC optimization or BMS. But actually what's really interesting is how do we adapt to thousands of more endpoints generating data, and how do we secure that, and how do we enable it? And, you know, there'll be some interesting developments in the coming years there.
Yeah, I do agree. Well, it was a pleasure, real pleasure to have you all on board. Thank you a lot for your time, for your insights. Very inspiring. I hope the audience liked it. And it was just a preview of what's coming on the 29th and 30th of June. Go to relevation.org and join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Idris. Thanks, Hong Kong.
Thanks a lot.